Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Around the Block with GoodBlock. Douglas and Erika here today, and we're going to be talking with a friend we actually met in Davos this year, Professor Crenguta Leaua, who is an experienced professional in the arbitration world. And then she's really got a very passionate focus on blockchain technology. We had a total blast this episode, and you two had a lot of really great back and forth. I felt like we were back in Davos again.
Yeah, she really invites the pushback,
Mm-hmm. Well, because, you learn there's so much exploration that can happen when you have that, right? Having, that back and forth really engages and makes you think a little bit harder and further and deeper, right? Especially with her. She's just so incredibly smart.
It is. Well, instead of talking about her, let's go and show the interview.
But first, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel and hit that notification icon if you'd like to be notified when we have new episodes come out.
Take it away.
Professor Crenguta, thanks so much for being here today with us. How are you doing?
Hi. Glad to see you again, and wonderful to have this opportunity to meet online.
Yeah, amazing to see you too. So I guess we can get started kind of just with a little bit of a brief introduction and kind of how we met, right? So Douglas and Professor Crenguta and I were all in Davos for the World Economic Forum this past year. I think the first time our paths crossed was actually at a kind of this group event where we split off into tables, and you and I ended up at the same table together. And then later on, we kept bumping into each other at the Global Blockchain Business Council area. Is that right?
True. Actually, us ladies, we were the first to meet. And then, Douglas and I, we got into some sort of quite heated debate on a legal and blockchain-related issue at the end of one of the presentations of the speakers. And at the end, we realized that actually all three of us, we knew each other, but in two different steps. It was a sequence in which we discussed, but basically the ideas were flowing between us without being stoppable.
Yeah, I recall it being a very friendly debate and more of an exploration of different ideas.
Yeah. Well, I'm a lawyer. I tend to, define things differently.
I get accused of being a little bit in there with my ideas. So, but I didn't feel like that was the case with you because I was just trying to keep up. So can you tell people a little bit more about your background? Because I just found it fascinating. And I think you're at the cutting edge of something really important. So can you share that with our viewers?
Thank you. I mean, my background is in the legal profession, in which I've done pretty much everything. I mean, I was, and I still am a practicing attorney at law, an arbitrator, which is basically a private judge, somebody who solves disputes upon the parties' agreement, and a law professor. So basically all areas of law. But then I developed a specific area of expertise, which was related with the technology-related disputes. So I was getting more and more into cross-examining experts, technical experts, economics experts in various areas of whatever it was, cutting edge technology. And at some point in time, I realized that actually I love that intersection between law, economics, and technology. And this is how I, at some point in time, many years ago, about 10 years ago, I landed up in the blockchain crowd because it was developing at that time in its very early phase, and it was a very interesting phenomena. So I was the first generation of the London School of Economics on cryptocurrency and disruption. And after that, I joined the Silicon Valley Arbitration Mediation Center, where currently I am a member of the board, and I'm also heading the initiative for arbitration and mediation for the blockchain-based transactions. So how you solve disputes that are somehow arising out of the blockchain-based transactions. Nowadays, we moved into the metaverse too, of course, because the technology is evolving.
And you're a professor. Are you currently teaching?
Yes, I do. I teach international dispute resolution, and I also teach new technologies and communication law at the Bucharest University of Economics. My students are students in economics and cybernetics and informatics for economics. So this is my crowd, and I also conduct PhD thesis in the area of alternative dispute resolution. We just had an international competition. This in the legal profession is called a mood. Basically, it's a simulation of a real case. And it was a cross-examination one, which is quite rare because it's a skill, the skill of interrogating somebody else. It's not a knowledge-based, it's a skill-based mood. And this year, for the first time in the history of these moods, the whole case was about blockchain-related disputes. It's about cryptocurrency transaction and the whole story around it. So the topic is reaching the legal world.
I mean, that just sounds kind of fascinating to listen to, even though I've heard that those kinds of things can be less than exciting. But I feel like with our positioning, I think it just, and everything that's been going on the last few weeks. And I think that's all stuff that's definitely going to be very relevant for people in this profession, very soon, if not yet. Right. So what are some of your thoughts on any of the stuff that's happened lately, like with FTX or, and the problems that have come up around that?
Well, I think it's an interesting moment for the legal profession because it tested the specificity of this kind of industry for the overall applicability of the general legal provision. So, for instance, like insolvency law, what's happening with insolvency law in such a case? What's happening with the regular provisions as to the presence in front of the court of law, how a party should be summoned, the right to be heard, etc., when you have some troubles identifying because of the anonymity the persons that might be interested into. Because in a bankruptcy, for instance, you have to invite all the creditors to submit their claims into the bankruptcy, and that is a challenge if those creditors are identified by wallet numbers or by identities that are in other form than the regular one. I mean the regular worldwide ones.
Sure.
So.
That's funny because this is one of the things, as I recall, one of the things our little debate was about at the GBBC was that a person or an entity or some kind of interest can be represented anonymously or pseudonymously by a blockchain address or account or something like that, and should still have rights and representation and whatnot under the law. And then we had a whole big thing about jurisdiction and that's my other huge thing I like to sort of talk about, like who has jurisdiction over blockchain.
My analogy last year, if you remember it, was with the Zeppelin or the spaceship that is taking off, going into some its own journey in which it may have independent rules on board, but then landing at some point in time. So the departing point and the landing point on the territory of a country, it's always related to the legislation of that country. So the moment when you land your spaceship or your Zeppelin, whatever kind of futurism or historical type of perspective you want to take, then in that moment you need somehow to get back to the real world. And this is happening in a bankruptcy, for instance. This is a forced landing. Basically, that is what's happening. Right. And
so
basically, these are the points
where they land.
It's the Hindenburg.
It is the Hindenburg.
Is what it is. So this is interesting. I've actually evolved my thoughts around that recently as I've been trying to look at whether there's actually even a right to legislate around blockchain in certain areas or to regulate it in the United States particularly. My contention was the first time that the U.S. started certainly knew of blockchain was when it seized Bitcoin assets as part of the Ross Ulbricht sting operation. So that's 10 years. And in that time, they have not come up with any good regulation or any regulations to the point where one could say, maybe the reason they're not doing it is by having no regulations, it really harms the industry so much, and that's what they want to do. And that could be, but I thought about it a little more, and this is what I came up with. We use many metaphors for what a blockchain is and what a cryptocurrency is. And they are all good ways to help us think about them, but none of them are correct in a legal sense. And we say, well, it's a currency, but it's not a currency. And if you really get down to it, every cryptocurrency is simply a writing. There is no currency. There is no physical, tangible object. There is all it is. Every blockchain is a writing. And all it does is it writes a number on a ledger, right? And there is zero tangible element to it. And so I would say that perhaps the problem with creating some kind of legal framework in the United States is there's no tangible object to latch onto, and what there is simply a written list. And in the United States, at least, there's a freedom to write and a freedom to publish that are sacrosanct. And I think that any kind of legislation that comes around that is you're going to have to face the fact at some point that it's basically it's an attempt to limit people's ability to write and publish, which are two of the most important freedoms under the U.S. Constitution. So
okay.
That's my crazy contention. Now, how wrong am I?
First of all, one should understand about the legal the regulations that are provided by the states, that they do not regulate technologies. They do not regulate situations of objective reality. They regulate relationship between people. So basically, it's not the technology itself, it's not the blockchain itself that it is regulated, but relationships between people in connection to that. So whatever it is, a relationship between various people in connection with the blockchain might be subjected to a specific regulation, and actually it is for sure by now. I mean, everybody is to respect the laws enforced at the place of its behavior, whatever that place might be, and sometimes even the laws enforced at the place of its own nationality. So the citizenship sometimes follows you wherever you go with the obligations of the country of origin. But then otherwise, it's the immediate application is of the laws at the place where you actually are. And in terms of internet and then the blockchain, the problem is where you are actually in that moment. I mean, where are you? And that was the problem. It was a delocalization problem. But in the end, the effects of whatever you do are produced in some place, either the event that has the potentiality to create an effect or the effect itself. They may be two different places. Like, for instance, uploading a website, it's one activity that you do at the place where you are actually doing this operation. But then the consumers that are in a way or another buying from that website, e-commerce platform, something, these are people located in different other places. So sometimes it's the same analogy as with the Zeppelin that we discussed before, or with the spaceship, departing and landing. At some point in time, you get in touch with the reality. And in those points where you get in touch into the reality, those are the points in which you are subjected to some regulation. Now, that is the first thing. So it's about a relationship between people. Now, if we would think about your definition, what is exactly a block, whether it is a writing? I had my own analogy some years ago, and I said that it is looking like, to me, a code is looking almost like music. I see no difference between notes, a series of notes, which is basically a numbering system of something, and then a series of numbers. And then you have this specific right that is provided to the author of a musical piece, and that is protected by intellectual property law. Now, what intellectual property law is? Intellectual property law protects the creation of the human mind in the form of musical notes. In this case, it could be writing, as you say. So the use of words, basically. And that is an act of creation. Because of that act of creation being communicated to the public, there is this convention, this legal convention, that we acknowledge that this person would have a right over that kind of series of notes, or that kind of series of words, and in this case, this kind of series of numbers. It's a convention. So absent law, it would be no right whatsoever. It's because of the law that you have a right. It's not attacking the law, it's actually creating here.
That is true, right? All those rights are actually created by law. The difference between what we're talking about is because I agree wholeheartedly with what you're saying about music. You're talking about the technology of blockchain as the music. And I'm talking about the literal numbers recorded on a ledger as the writing. That writing I'm talking about is a product of the code itself, or the music.
Just think about a piece of music. Let's say, I don't know, Hey Jude from Beatles, or you name it. Any kind of musical piece that you can think of. Each of them is basically a series of notes, and that series of notes is claimed to belong to somebody, because in a way it is accessible to everybody, but we accept that somebody would have rights over it as the first one to put together that series of notes. Now, in the case of blockchain, it's a different story, because it's not the series itself that we recognize to have a right, but it is basically the system in which it is protected to be unique and allocated to one person only, and not to more than one. So it would be like a world in which it would be impossible for anybody else to write the notes of the Beatles songs, because the word itself would not allow those notes to be used in the same series in the same way for somebody else. So that's why I'm saying that the technology is somehow related with the product itself, because absent the product, it won't be unique. The encryption itself is giving its unicity. It's not the idea of somebody saying 345221 instead of 345223. So that's in music what is actually the exclusivity. The first one who said that kind of series of notes is the one to have the right protected, because it's the one who came up with this idea of using this kind of series of notes. In the blockchain system, it's not that. In the blockchain system is that you have that series, but that series is protected by technology. It's not protected by the convention agreement of the society to give you this right, like the copyright.
Similar to that, though, all rights are given to us by our government. So what the United States government is trying to do right now is set up a group of rules based on the social contract between citizens, residents, and governments. But the cryptocurrency is a entirely separate social contract that the government's not related to, right? So they are trying to apply laws that are saying, well, I am transferring something I'm transferring value to Erika, but I'm actually not transferring value to Erika. I'm taking a set of rules, your musical code, right? And through that, I am changing a writing of what's recorded on my ledger address and recording it on her ledger address and some various other things. But I'm not actually transferring anything tangible. And if I were, everything would fit under the existing government social contract. But in fact, this is a social contract that is beyond traditional jurisdictions, and it's between me and anyone else who uses that system. And the governments don't really have a role in that. And I think you actually you look at a country like Portugal, which says, hey, all this stuff happens on the blockchain, whatever. But then when it comes back to our fiat currency, then our rules preside. And I think that's fair. I would love to hear your thought on that.
Basically, this goes way back to the philosophy of law and the entitlement of states to regulate over citizens' behavior. So this is heavy stuff, I would say. It's heavy philosophical stuff. Let me put you into the mind frame in which we are functioning nowadays. And the mind frame is the following. We as people, we decided together, and that is the social contract, to agree to delegate the power to establish the rules of our collective behavior in order to maintain peace between us to this entity that is the state, the government, the centralized authority. And that is the way in which the whole world functions at this moment. It is a discussion about what will happen with the outer space, but I won't go in that direction. But at this moment, this is the reality in which we are following a long evolution of the society. Now, what this social contract is, it's basically an agreement between everybody living in a specific country and then between the countries themselves to comply with this type of thinking in which this government has the power to regulate the behavior of the people in the sense of the common good in order for us not to, kill each other for nothing. And that would be the idea. In this concept, wherever the government wishes to regulate something because it considers to be useful to the society, this is possible. So it's not a limited possibility. It is where, for instance, as it was your thinking, the government should regulate wherever the government is directly involved and should not regulate wherever the government is not directly involved. That's a different story. That is the story about where should they regulate, not where could they regulate. And the could is there for everything. Now, where is the should? I mean, where should they regulate? This is a matter of legal policy. And the policy is never only legal. It's actually the legal, it's an instrument for the interventionism of the state. And then you go to the policies, and then you have, more interventionist or less interventionist type of government. And these governments usually tend to intervene nowadays in the modern world less than before, in the sense that they intervene in those areas in which they consider to have this need to protect the society. What is interesting is that the more we evolve into structures that are collective and therefore powerful because of the group they create, like, for instance, corporations and corporate law, organizations, and the law of the company law in general, trade unions and trade unions law, NGOs, and then all the law related to that. So whenever you have group of people that in a way or another are building up a system that is of interactions between them that may or may not be compatible with the overall society system, that is the moment in which usually regulation appears. So when I saw some years ago the blockchain community developing, I realized that what is developing is actually a parallel ecosystem to the present ones. And there are many ecosystems. It's the educational ecosystem in which you have parents, schools, government, private, children. So you have an ecosystem around education. You have an ecosystem around, for instance, the health issues. You have an ecosystem of various industries. And this was an ecosystem in the economy that was quite complex. I mean, like a completely parallel organization to the existing one, covering many facets potentially. And indeed, in the last decade, it happened to enter in many industries, and therefore there are many facets into it. And metaverse is a development of an additional facet, the most integrative one.
I think it's important, right, that this it's parallel, but it also is a different jurisdictional overlay.
I wouldn't say that. I'm just saying that organizationally speaking, it is an ecosystem. Now, what does society do? Society, it's an ecosystem in its own. And the society of humanity on Earth, it's an ecosystem already because of international law that links the various countries between them. So at this moment, we have a globe with an ecosystem. And that ecosystem sees that there is another ecosystem developing inside. And that ecosystem is cross-border. And what is happening with it? Of course, that these two compatibilities need at some point in time to function somehow, because you cannot have two parallel realities of the same person's behavior. For instance, I could not have two different layers of my behavior in which something is permissible and something is not happening in the same time, in the same moment. For instance, discussing with you right now could be legal or illegal in two different perspectives. It shouldn't be so. I should be consistent with my behavior in terms of whether it is legal or not, permissive or not. So it's almost like in programming. Basically, legislation, it's a programming of the society behavior. It's the programming of the what society should function. And if you think in the programming terms, whenever you have a system, a subsystem, that is developing inside a bigger system, you have to make it compatible, because otherwise it will become a source of blockage and a source of erratic behavior. So this compatibility is the law. So the purpose of the law for regulating the blockchain technology is to make compatible the two words. Normally, it should be less interventionist and only interfere wherever it is needed. There are many countries in which new legislation is developed nowadays, and they list which would be the domains in which they want to interfere. And all legislators everywhere, particularly, for instance, in the European Union, when this legislation has been developed quite in agreement of many countries together in the European Union. So it's not one thinking, it's a lot of nationalities involved there, and national perspectives. The thinking there is, where should we have the minimum intervention as to make sure that this is functional together, society and the ecosystem of the blockchain. And areas are usually the area of consumer protection, the area of protection of the children, the area of protection of the environment, the area of protection of fundamental rights of this society, the overall one. Otherwise, the space of private behavior of a group of individuals by the rights of association, for instance, is recognized worldwide. I mean, it's not something that would be, except in totalitarian regimes, restricted unnecessarily.
That's very interesting. I love hearing what you thought and what you think, and it just expands my mind. So thank you. I think it begins to show just how complex some of these questions are. And it also, I think, shows that this is not a legal question in the way that we had a contract and I delivered half. So should I be paid half, or should I be paid none, or should I be paid all because of why I delivered it? That's not what we're talking about. We really do have to go back to the very first principles on all of these things and say, okay, what's value? And what is a jurisdiction, and what are each of these things? I think we really have to go back because as you dig down, there's just these areas where they don't align with our traditional understandings of any of these things. And I think we're going to have to dig deep and figure out what these mean. Are we going to have to go to the most basic legal questions about who we are and what we owe each other and what our contracts are and where people are, or is the current legal framework strong enough, and people in governments just need to apply the standards that are well defined and already exist?
Okay, so there are 2 points to address here. First is what kind of legal systems we have, and if they are adaptable enough or not. And actually they are, because the legal system is built in a form that goes from very general provisions like principles. Usually you find them in constitutions, and then it gets more and more detailed. So when something is not fitting into the existing norms at a lower level of this kind of construction of the legal system, then you just change the lower level. You don't need to address the fundamentals to change something that is not fitting at the lower level. For instance, let's say, what is a tangible, non-tangible asset? Tangible or non-tangible assets are defined by law by many centuries. So it's not something new. It's something that existed. The idea is that, for instance, the right to have a name, it's a non-tangible asset, and it has been recognized since the Roman law. So it's not something that it's impossible. So I would say that the legal system as it is strong and it's adaptable, it's flexible. And the common law legal system, it's even more flexible because it has even less written legislation and allows more the judge to adapt and create legislation as long as the judge is confronted with new cases in which it finds the need to provide new rules for those cases. So it's even more adaptable. But that is the first point. What is the situation of the legal system? But I would like to say something else. Why actually people that otherwise would be confined in an area of economy or in the area of technology is looking at the area of law. And I think that is the true question here. And the question here is a question of the specificity of this technology. So what blockchain did, as opposed to many other technologies, is that it embedded a philosophy. And that philosophy is basically libertarian. And the libertarian philosophy embedded in the technology itself, not only the decentralization, the situation of having even more than decentralization, of having this kind of relationships that are self-sufficient, I would say, in a way. That's why it's also the conception of ecosystem, because somehow they manage to live inside the system without necessarily having a lot of exchanges outside. And that kind of situation, plus the philosophy that is basically against centralization, creates this kind of philosophical clash, because the fundamental of the state is centralized government. While here we are not operating with the idea of centralization or even not decentralization. And for that reason, it's complicated to have philosophically the two compatible. And people working with the technology at some point in time, all the communities, they develop the behavior that is based on that philosophy that is in the technology. So when you develop that behavior, at some point in time, you question all your other behaviors that are not compatible with the same system. And you realize that actually you're functioning with two different philosophical systems, the centralized one and the decentralized one, the type of logics. Mm-hmm. And in that case, you tend, as any kind of human being, instead of having two different mindsets, to try to harmonize them and try to make one. And then either you are pushing aside the blockchain technology because it's too strange for you and you want to stay with centralization. And the other one is the opposite, resisting and challenging the central authority wherever that central authority is, including in a family, for instance, challenging whatever it would be centralized. Let's do distributed families, distributed, neighborhood associations, distributed politics, etc. Yes. And because of that clash, you are at this moment questioning the fundamental of the law, because the law is based on a centralized system in which you have somebody, which is the state power, that intervenes to ensure the compliance with the law. That is the fundamental difference between the agreements between the parties and the law. Because in the case of the law, you have the central authority of the state intervening to enforce the rule. You don't have that into a contract. And here is a problem. And that is why these discussions are taking place, not because they are needed objectively, because the legal system would not be good enough, but because it's a philosophical clash. And people, when speaking about philosophy, they think that it is something very remote, but philosophy is basically the mindset. What is your mind frame? Which is the
what are we going to do? What's right? What's wrong?
How do you think? How do you think? Yeah, and how do you think? How do you think? It's always a matter that affects what do you think? Because whatever you're thinking, it's starting with how do you put that information in your mind?
Absolutely. So long term, it's very hard to hold two differing opinions, especially when they start going off into different directions. But what you're saying is, if I am hearing correctly, that we grow up in a world filled and defined by central authorities, whether that be our parents or our teachers or our government, whoever has the guns, right? When people become exposed to ideas that, hey, what if, there is the ability to think of the world without centralized authorities. The majority of people right now who try to look into blockchain and cryptocurrencies, they have that reaction that you just described, which is, I can't think of both of these things at the same time. I'm not going to stretch my imagination for the amount of time it takes to sort of make that shift to the new reality. And so therefore I'm going to reject this idea, because how can you have a world without banks and governments and whatnot? And then there's the people who, I don't think this makes them libertarians. I think it's largely people who already have some certain leanings there, more often than not, that say, oh, no, this makes sense. And ultimately, they won't both be able to thrive and drive the major organization of people, but also probably over time, there will be a transition from one to the other. Likely not in our lifetimes, but because they are inconsistent philosophies that people have to deal with. And right now, all the defaults come back to the central authority. There's some glimmers of things that are likely to happen because they'll be more efficient in certain ways that are going to change that. And of course, centralized. One of the advantages of centralized governance is that it is much more efficient. The more centralized, the more efficient it tends to be. But what you also see is it creates greater discord between the governed and the governing, and those often ultimately in breaks, where the system of governance actually ends and needs to be replaced. Like we've seen in numerous places. So it's going to be an interesting process, I think.
I don't think that we need to go into an exclusive mindset, because and actually at this moment part of my work is to be the director of the Swiss Institute for Alternative Thinking, where actually I'm helping people to develop this kind of skill of looking at the matters that they and the problems they want to solve from the perspective that it is useful in order to solve that problem, to reach the outcome that is needed. So no, not necessarily we need to go towards one mindset only. I think we have to define areas in which is useful and efficient and respectful enough to use one or the other. And I think it's about a tool box that we have to use in the future, not only for material objects, but also for philosophies or way of thinking. And basically, flexibility in this respect is needed. And actually, we do have that kind of flexibility. Just look around. I mean, every single word that is cherishing in a way or another a form of diversity and a form of respect for something that is not yourself in the way that you think that you should be or it should be, that is already exercising this kind of approach in which you see value in another form of organization, thinking, structure, approach, perspective than yours. And this kind of mentality in which you are going to be able to identify what is the mindset that the other person has, what is the mindset that I have, and how do I make the dialogue possible between the two of them? That is something of use. At this moment, for instance, you can see this kind of approaches in international public law, where different states having different kind of concepts, for instance, monarchies and democracies, or totalitarian and non-totalitarian states, are at the same table and try to discuss and agree. And same with the religions and interreligious dialogue, where also you have different kind of philosophies, and nevertheless they can approach a dialogue, and they can reach a point in which they are not conflictual. So not necessarily we need to go in one or the other of the directions, but to define territories and define efficiency and define respect.
Kind of talking about a place where we can all come together and say, like, yes, these are the things where we align and where we agree that we should be doing this kind of arbitration. It also makes me think a little bit about you had written a paper a while back about Greek gods and the metaverse and how that was related. You talk about how there's just these different planes, and they have their own rules each, right? And how they deal with the other planes, those relationships that we've kind of yet to explore and form totally, right? I mean, where do we start then? What kind of regulations do we start with? Are there first steps where we can build these agreements?
Well, actually, we are already in process of starting it, and there are two ways to start something: bottom up and and the opposite. So both of them started. First of all, the industry started by self-regulating. You have a lot of industry standards that basically it's going from self-regulation. This is root cause regulation. This is proposal for regulation. This is the place in which some approaches are starting. And the other one is from up to down. And Douglas Douglas mentioned the Bitcoin case. If the state needed to seize some Bitcoins, it seized the Bitcoins immediately without having any concerns about the owner being anonymous. And that actually is, I don't remember the case, but I think that the first one in my personal reading was not about Bitcoin. It was about some barrels of Coca-Cola that were seized by the name of the barrel. I mean, the number on the barrel instead of the owner, because they were in a deposit and nobody knows to whom it belongs. So it was basically an address like a wallet and some codes, numbers on the storage system, and that was it. And it was state versus this kind of barrels, or in this case, state versus this Bitcoins. And this is up to down. I mean, it's a situation in which the state needs somehow to implement the law in a situation, and it does so. So that's it.
What you're describing is basically civil forfeiture, right? Where it's the United States against a suitcase full of money,
yeah,
right? And then people can argue about. I mean, that we have that a lot.
Yeah, it is, and it is for me in continental Europe. This is much more rare because it's not the way in which usually the justice system is approaching the matters of this kind. So usually the goods should be declared as abandoned, and then they will pass into the property of the state, and basically that would be the system.
It's really interesting. You're saying there's the top and the bottom, top down, bottom up approach, but I think there's another way to looking at this. Then I get this from what you were saying before, right? Early in the conversation, you were saying, our rights are guaranteed to us by law, right? And that's true. I think that there's two approaches to regulation or that governments are exploring. And right now, the first one is prescribing what one cannot do, right? You can't do this. This is money. You can't treat it like this. You can't treat it like this because it's money. The other side, though, we could be doing is say, well, what freedoms can we guarantee? For example, can we agree that, creating software, creating the music, like you were saying, that you can't just be arrested for contributing to software that, after the fact, some places decide are illegal. But you've got, for example, in Amsterdam right now, you've got Alexei Pertzi, I think his name is, who's a developer of Tornado Cash, and he was arrested, didn't enjoy the same rights to habeas corpus that we technically do in the United States. And I believe he's still sitting in jail without charges for the act of contributing open source software code to Tornado Cash. Like, I would say that if we're going to start regulating things, the first regulations would be regulations that protect people and grant them rights to, that they may already have in other areas, and clarify that those rights to write and publish and things like that are also protected in the traditional government's interactions with people. If you can't arrest them for writing a book, you probably can't arrest them for writing software that, for accounting software, which is basically what blockchain is. What do you think about that? Going instead of saying no, saying yes. Ultimately, they all kind of bring us to the same thing, right?
Well, in the legal profession, we define the type of rights and obligations as being positive and negative. Basically, a positive one is when a permission is given, and the negative one is where an interdiction is in place. And I think that it's exactly as with horses or bicycles or cars or whatever. You need both. You need acceleration and you need a brake. I mean, these are the two basic commands of any kind of, type of structure that you try to operate. And I don't think in an exclusive approach because, for instance, if you only set freedoms or rights and you in a positive way, and you never define anything in a negative way, just try to speak yourself with anybody that you know for 30 minutes without using any kind of negative phrase, without using the no. And basically imagine how you do with a child when you educate a child how to behave in the world. You try to do positive enforcement, but also negative. So you need both. You need to tell him, no, no, no. And you need to tell me, yeah, go on, do that. So you need two type of approaches in order to handle any kind of human behavior. That is why I'm not exactly sure that we could go in only one way.
Right. So if we only defined rights, my right to take anything I want would interfere with your right to have property that somebody doesn't just take. Right. So we can't have both. There have to be both positive and negative.
And they are. If you allow me just one analogy, very simple one, the one that I usually give. Do you remember those coins that are not crypto coins, but they are on metal, and that you can stamp them? And the initial ones, the ones that they were initially, you stamp them on this side and they get imprinted, and you have a profile on the other side. You see? So when you go into the metal with a mold or anything, you go
like
on
a
one
typical
side.
coin.
Exactly, like the
You're
typical
talking
coin.
about a €2 coin or something, like an actual metal
The very
printed
old one.
sovereign coin.
Yeah. So whatever it was in profile up here, it was in a negative on the other side. It was always like this. So if you do have a right, I have an obligation. If you have a freedom, I have the negative obligation not to harm your freedom, not to restrict your freedom, etc. So it is always a dual relationship. If you do have a right, somebody else would have the obligation to respect your right. And that means that always they go together. So in a relationship, if somebody has something, the other one has the opposite of that something, namely to the obligation to respect it, which means not to do something to harm. And that is the negative. So you simply cannot possibly say something that is a freedom without putting in place obligations that would be of negative formulation. Do not. If you have the right of life, you have the obligation not to kill. I mean, it's simple as that.
Right. I mean, in the metaphor you're using, which is like a struck coin, right?
Yeah.
Then the coin itself is somebody has to become the arbiter, and that's where you come in. Somebody has to decide where one person's rights end and the others begin, and without a system like that, it doesn't really matter what the rights are unless it is purely a law of the jungle. Code is law. Whatever the code does is what it is, which is not really a world I don't want to live in that entire world. Perhaps for financial transactions, but not for everything else.
You know that arbitration, it's actually completely outside the government system. Arbitration is a private form of justice, and as such, it doesn't necessarily have to apply the law. So one of the peculiarities of this area of arbitration, which is basically something else than the state courts, but nevertheless providing with a binding award. So it will be a decision of an arbitrator that would replace a decision of a judge in terms of its force. Now, what we can do in the arbitration world, we can decide irrespective of any laws. If the parties agree, and imagine, for instance, that the DAO would include that in the white paper of a blockchain, they agree to submit any kind of disputes between them to an arbitration to decide absent any kind of law, irrespective of any law. This can be done. In arbitration, it's called as equo et bono, which is to decide in terms of fairness. And in that moment, the arbitrator simply would rely on their own sense of fairness, what it is fair, what it is just. And they wouldn't rely on any text of law whatsoever. And this cannot be done by judges. So, for instance, most of the legal system, not most, all of them, ask judges to comply with the law. In this case, in the arbitration, we can decide based on this sense of fairness and justice, and not necessarily apply the law. But we need a parties' agreement. I mean, all the parties need to agree to that. It cannot be done to somebody that is not in agreement for this kind of decision to be taken.
Right. And we did that with Telos, by the way. And I know that this is something I think we wanted to start out talking about, and we don't have time now, unfortunately, but we did, although it's not just what the arbitrator feels is right, there are rules around it. From the very beginning, we did set that, user agreement amongst everyone using Telos, saying that we do have these rules. If there is dispute resolution, it needs to go through this process that we've created, and to the best of our ability have created in concert with the rules of terrestrial governments. Boy, was that hard. I wish I'd known you and I had to figure that out. But I'd love to talk about that sometime, because that's actually kind of fascinating. That is the mix between what you've been saying and I've been saying. I mean, not that we're saying different things, but I think we, for the sake of discussion, have taken slightly different, philosophical positions. And that was my attempt to say there are governments. We want to be outside. Is there a process within the governments, within the international rules, that we could actually set up our own rules and be outside? And that's what we tried to do with Telos, and we'll see how that works out.
Well,
Awesome.
I mean,
Well-
you're builders of new realities, of new structures, of new relationships. And when somebody builds something, is also responsible to that building. Building regulations, it's on you this time.
We're all builders of our reality. We just don't all realize it. I hope that people who are watching recognize that.
Awesome. Well, I think that's about all the time we have today, unfortunately. Thank you so much for spending so much time with us, Crenguta. It's been amazing. Can you tell us where our listeners can follow you or learn more about your work?
That's simple. Just try to look at the website of the Swiss Institute for Alternative Thinking, which obviously is alternativethinking.ch.
We'll definitely link that down below too. Thank you again for your time. It's been amazing, and hopefully we get to chat with you again soon.
I'm looking forward. Great meeting you today.
Wow, I love talking to her.
So fun.
She's so smart.
Yeah, seriously. So this week, we are coming to you from the past so that our teams can have some time off over the holiday season. So in today's pre-recorded episode of Nathaniel Moss's Market Minute, Nathaniel is actually going to hit us with some tips, definitions, and other non-financial advice for our Market Minute this week. Are you ready, Nathaniel?
I am ready.
All right. 3, 2, 1, go.
You might have heard of a death cross and a golden cross, but what are they? The drop of the 50-day moving average below the 200-day moving average is known as a death cross. The death cross is a market chart pattern which reflects recent price weakness. It refers to a very steep, short drop of a short-term moving average. The most closely watched stock market moving averages are the 50-day and the 200-day. The rise of this moving average is also known as a golden cross and can signal the exhaustion of upward market momentum. Since 1971, there have been 23 death crosses in the NASDAQ composite indexes. The 23rd occurred in February 22 and has led to long periods of a depression. The death cross has proven to be a useful bearish market timing signal when occurring after market losses of 20% or more. That's the death cross.
Awesome. Thank you.
And a golden cross is like the opposite, right?
The golden cross is the opposite. Yep.
All right. Thanks, Nathaniel. That was an amazing Market Minute. This has been quite a year.
Yeah, it has been a pretty crazy year. I mean, it seems like this wasn't even this year. Like the Terra Luna drama was so long ago, and then FTX is so new, and Twitter is just insane. What's a bit of your guys' favorite block stuff of the year?
I feel like a lot of it is just like a one long story, right? There's this long story of Three Arrows Capital leading into Luna, leading into other things, leading into FTX, right? And at the very beginning of this series, one of the first ones we did was Three Arrows Capital. We go, well, amazing to see where it goes next,
Yeah.
and it's still going, you know.
No, it is interesting. It is like a giant house of cards. Or dominoes. I don't know that everything.
And mostly it's not the decentralized stuff.
Yeah, I would say only the decentralized stuff.
Someone's like, crypto is bad, and it's like, no, this is just your own stuff. This is the old stuff we're trying to get rid of.
People applying Web 2 to Web 3 and saying, oh no, look what's happened.
Darn crypto, you know. No, this is just Bernie Madoff. This is just Enron. This is just people ripping you off like, this is Ponzi. There was a Ponzi, and he did this, and apparently people love him. None of these people like believe in the ethos of what's really trying to be done. And I mean, great example is SBF gets on this big debate with Eric Voorhees about crypto regulation, and revealed then he didn't know jack about what he was talking about. He doesn't know anything. Guy's an idiot. He just doesn't even know what he's talking about. And what's amazing is so many people, like, that's the real BS of the year, that people gave him that much money. It was clear then.
There's a lot of people that are, nice, smooth talkers and able to get people to give the money that we later go, why? What? What were you thinking?
He's more like a smooth babbler, if anything. I've seen him talk.
Gosh, I think one of my favorite pieces of BS from this year was something we also covered at one point, where somebody was using basically a lawyer that they let stay and have an office in their building, and they would just constantly be going after different crypto projects just so that they could use that discovery process in the legal system to get access to information that they otherwise shouldn't have. I mean, that was the fact that I didn't really hear anything else come out of that. I'm still like, what's happening there? What did they do? Because that's nuts. We need some kind of change.
That was the class action lawsuit. So they would file these class actions against these, and then nothing would happen, but they would just get the private information.
It probably settle. I bet there's a lot of people who saw that and said, "Oh, that's terrible," and then there's other people who saw that and go, "Oh, that's a good idea."
Well, I do think that we're never going to run out of block stuff.
Juicy block
of
stuff.
The week.
We will not. We will not. What? So there's also the Twitter. The Twitter thing is its own deal. I hesitate to talk about it because a week from now, who knows if it will even be a thing anymore.
Yeah, and it's just Web 2 anyway.
It's Web 2. I know. It's a great way to get into Web 3.
Well, if you're watching, share with us below where you're going so that we can also go there and make sure that we can still keep up with everybody. I know that this is going to be a big blow to the crypto space. I would argue probably crypto is the one industry that uses Twitter the most still. And so I'm very curious to see where that goes, where everybody ends up.
It'll be a good break, a good, nice, clean break, because all these services that we use as a community, but that don't really support us. Bye. Like, that's where we need to be. Unfortunately, there's not yet any clear successor. Nothing is perfect, and it just takes a while. And gosh, I wish there were. There's so many different attempts, and that just haven't come together. Definitely use Apix though.
Yes.
If you want an Instagram, use Apix, and you can still post. Apparently on Twitter, as of when we're recording this, you can still post your Apix account.
Excellent.
Maybe that's the way to do it. You post the accounts where you will be, like, oh yeah, I can still post my GitHub account, okay, without getting banned, right? You gotta post it in a way that that you can not get banned, right? So long enough for people to transition over. I think the writing's just on the wall. I mean, it's like your bank says, oh, we're gonna start charging you interest on all the money you keep in our bank from now on, but we're not going to do it. We're not sure when we're going to do it. Sometime in the next 6 weeks, something like that. You go, okay, well, I guess I got a little bit of time to go and get a new bank account, but I'm sure not doing it here. It's like Rackspace. Nobody's going back to them, right?
Right.
Like, you wouldn't go back to them. It doesn't matter. I feel sorry for them, whatever, but you can't trust your business to them anymore, so you don't. All right, so here's a alpha drop from me. There's a new airdrop going on and new chain in the Antelope system coming online, made for payment. It's supposed to be optimized for Bitcoin and USDT payments across an Antelope type system. It's called Bitcoin Libre, or just Libre, Libre. If you had an account on Telos, EOS, Wax, Ethereum, Solana, any of those, that had at least $1 of value in it as of April, I think, when they took their snapshot. Then you can get on their spin drop, where you have, a little gamified thing, and you could win up to like 10,000 Libre, but you'll only win between 100 and 300 in my experience. Still, it's really cool. For every account you have, you can also do it, right? So if you have 5 or 6 Telos accounts that had something in them, you can do that spin for each of those. You create an account. It's free to create an account. Drop your Libre on there.
Is this going to be along the lines of kind of like the Satoshis that we had talked about, like that kind of ease of payment, or a little different?
Sure. It's not 100% like the Satoshi tokens that I had talked about, but it is very much like that kind of ease of payment idea. It uses P tokens, P network, BTC, and it also is hooked up into the Bitcoin Lightning Network. So it's really good. I've tried it out. GoodBlock is working as a block producer on it. When we first came in, there were some things that I thought it was interesting, but I was able to talk to them about some stuff. One thing was they hadn't included accounts on Telos where the funds were in Rex. And so that meant like a lot of people, since that's where we sort of keep all our funds, they were excluded. So I talked to them, and CC32 D9 from Amsterdam made me a snapshot, and I was able to redo that for them and calculate it. So a lot of people wouldn't have it. I remember when we were trying to do our airdrop for Telos, and like nobody would talk about it. It was so frustrating. I was like, at least tell your own people. Like it's not for us, it's for them. We would like them to get the money and have the coins, and and then afterwards, so many people came in and go, "Oh, can we still get this?" And it's like, no,
Yeah. Well, and especially as we're trying to kind of grow our group of networks, I think, a little bit more holistically, and realizing that like different chains have different advantages and features, and that realistically our users are going to use all of these chains, right? We don't need to just say, oh, we only want people to hang out in Telos, because like it's really beneficial for the ecosystem in general as a whole. And Antelope, if all of these, our customers are all the same people, right? They're all using these Antelope products because they're fast and eco-friendly and cheap. I think there's going to be some awesome use cases for that.
We want to grow the whole community. We want to grow Telos, and we want to grow the community. And there's and we can do both of those things better if we don't do it in a way that's hostile, right? Or pretends the others are fierce, are our enemies, as opposed to our competitors. We are competing, and we do want Telos to do best of all of these, of course. But at the same time, I think one of the ways to do best of all these, or to do really well, is to be really open and available to these other chains, to bring in the users and have users of EOS become users of Telos too. And I don't know where Libre will go. This is not financial advice, but when in doubt, grab your airdrop, and even if you just dump it, in a few weeks, if you want to put a little bit of value on the mint rush, which is a thing they have going on from December 15th to January 14th or 15th, you can drop a little bit of Bitcoin on there, PBTC, and everybody who puts some in will get a share of 200 million Libre that will be minted. So it's a chance to get a lot. And if these things go up in value, then you can gain quite a bit if you want to get involved in that way. I'm not recommending it. I'm not recommending it. I'm just saying it's a thing to look at. You can go there and check it out at Libre, libre.org. And the spin drop is spindrop.libre.org. I definitely recommend you grab your accounts. If you want to put in a referrer, go ahead and put GoodBlock in there, or anyone else you want. And if you and then look into what they're doing and see if you think it's a cool deal. If you want to drop a few Satoshis into there and have some, get some from the paid group, which is much larger. But I just think people should know about it. There's not a lot of new chains of value that are launching now, and what I can tell you is that the block producers that are behind it are the really good block producers from the antelope space. So that's one of the things that gives me interest in it, and that's why we're there too. And if you do come on, vote for GoodBlock as your your friends at GoodBlock.
Yeah, don't forget to vote for GoodBlock.
Yeah, and you can do that on Telos too. By the way, always appreciated.
Awesome.
That's sort of a wrap up on our year here at Around the Block, right?
I think so.
And we have some fun changes coming in the new year with title and branding and focus and things like that, and maybe or maybe not. You never know.
All right. Well, thanks so much, guys, and we'll see you in the new year.
Yeah, have a great end of your year. Have a great new year, and really exciting things for 2023 for Telos, GoodBlock, the world, and hopefully for you as well.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.